It's enough to make one wonder, who is really responsible for the experiences of churchgoers? God or the church?
Genetically Modified Skeptic recently released an interesting video in which he talks about the tactics churches use to emotionally influence their congregations in order to convert people and maintain members. While he didn't get everything quite right, Drew has put his finger on something Christians should take very seriously, and that's what this video is about. My name is Lucas, by the way, and this is my channel Deflate, which challenges skeptics, strengthens believers, and creates a space for awesome discussions about God. If you're a Christian, you might feel challenged by some of the things I'm gonna say. If that's the case, I ask you to hear me out till the end. My point is not to bash the church, not at all. All I'm trying to do here is to really listen to Drew's critique of the church and to engage with it with honesty and humility, because I genuinely believe that there's a valuable lesson we can learn from it. I'm fully aware that I might be getting things wrong, and if you believe I am, please let me know in the comments. Are you ready? Let's get started. In case you don't know Drew, he used to be an evangelical Christian, and in his video, he sets out to do the following.
Today, I'm taking you to church. Not literally, of course, but rather I'm going to walk you through a church service based on my experience over the first 21 years of my life, where I consistently attended church 3 times per week.
He essentially goes through each single element of a typical Sunday church service, starting from the official beginning to the worship, the sermon, and the final blessing, with the following aim.
As the service progresses, we'll discuss the techniques churches often use to emotionally influence their attendees for the sake of converting people, convincing the audience of the speaker's message, retaining members, and motivating people to base their entire lives on Christianity.
Setting his sights on how music and rituals are supposedly utilized to hype people up emotionally, he goes on to say that
the practices I'll discuss have just become so normalized that most Christians at any level of leadership don't thoroughly consider the ethics of these practices.
Before he gets into the thick of it, he mentions that not everything he talks about applies to all churches across the board to an equal degree, given the great amount of diversity across Christian denominations. And more importantly,
I don't mean to imply that those coordinating church services have any malicious intent. I think the vast majority of those involved in these services mean well and care about their congregation.
I appreciate Drew's charity here, and I'd like to emphasize that throughout his critique, Drew maintains the same respectful attitude. That's at least the impression I got from watching his video, and I thought that was cool. Drew argues that church leaders purposefully create an emotional atmosphere in their Sunday services in order for people to be more receptive and impressionable.
Repetitive ritual, especially when music is involved, creates an emotionally charged, receptive, even impressionable crowd. Church and music leaders of all kinds know this well.
It's against this background that Drew states that
music, especially in social settings, takes you out of your head and ushers you into a shared emotional experience. This understanding of music's power to create specific emotional states plays a major role in church leaders' efforts to influence their congregation.
Drew also talks about the way in which rituals and repetitive action performed as a community serve as tools to make an entire congregation malleable.
It's basic social psychology. Acting in unity with a crowd, especially in repetitive actions, lessens your sense of self and allows you to act as one with others without much effort. Instinctively, conforming becomes what's most comfortable.
Drew moves on to say that churches depend on emotional priming because Christianity simply isn't intellectually convincing.
When making a purely rational case is difficult for any number of reasons, leaders often rely on using emotion to convince others of that case instead.
In contrast,
if the gospel is intellectually convincing, people shouldn't need to be emotionally primed before hearing it.
But Drew isn't done here. His critique reaches its climax, I believe, in the claim that the experience of God's presence in a church, routinely reported by churchgoers, is actually an experience of a simulation of God's presence that has been cleverly staged. Listen to what he says here.
When all of these elements, the repetition, the carefully selected emotionally charged music, the prayer directed at the emotionally vulnerable, all come together within a service, They don't just serve to facilitate spiritual experiences, but rather to simulate them.
That's my summary of Drew's case, and I tried my best to represent it as accurately as possible. Now let's look at the things he gets right and the things he doesn't. First of all, I believe that Drew's criticism of church rituals completely misses the target. I definitely agree with him that there are lots of rituals happening in a church service, but that's because rituals form an intrinsic part of human life in general, rather than of a church service in particular. I mean, if you drink coffee or take a shower every morning, you're basically performing a ritual. In fact, you can read entire articles on best morning rituals, and the exact same can be said of bedtime rituals. Hugging your friends and shaking hands are other rituals we perform day in, day out without even noticing. Watch a football match and you'll spot at least a dozen rituals happening within 90 minutes. Or even better, watch a couple of Drew's own videos and the pervasiveness of rituals and repetitive action will become just as apparent.
Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic.
To perform a ritual is to conform to an agreed upon pattern, and one of the functions of rituals is to strengthen connections between people. So Drew is spot on when he mentions that repetitive actions and rituals in a church service foster unity and conformity, and that that's a matter of basic social psychology. But so what? Wherever people gather, rituals are part of the mix. This is a simple truism, and to use it as a point of criticism betrays a lack of understanding of what rituals are. When it comes to the issue of churches designing an emotionally charged atmosphere through music, I believe that Drew is onto something. I agree with him that a good amount of churches seem to be primarily focused on making their services emotionally appealing instead of intellectually stimulating. I believe that's because much of contemporary Christianity has bought into the lie that it's the emotions you feel that tell you who you really are and not the thoughts you think. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard Christians suggest that if you do what is right only because you know it to be so in your head without feeling it in your heart, then you're a hypocrite and a Pharisee, because the Bible tells us that God looks into your heart. The problem with that is that for the authors of the Bible, the heart was the seat of your will, not the epicenter of your emotions. Nor does the Bible suggest at any point that right feeling is more important than right thinking. In contrast, a more theologically healthy way of considering the two is to see both our emotional and our rational capacities forming equal parts of our creation in God's image. Therefore, to say that our emotions are more important than our reason is to pursue an image created in the likeness of contemporary culture rather than an image created in the likeness of the God revealed in the Bible. As far as I'm concerned, Drew has successfully put his finger on a major misconception that plagues contemporary Christianity. By pointing out that many church services seem to be predominantly geared toward an emotional experience, he has highlighted that a lot of us either consciously or unconsciously hold that following Christ is about getting your emotions rather than your thoughts in the right place. That Drew is onto something seems to be confirmed by none other than Jordan Peterson and Bishop Barron, by the way. I made a video responding to their recent conversation about modern-day Christianity, and among other things, Bishop Barron said this.
So I've been telling our people, we got to stop trying to hug people back into the faith. We have to argue them back into the faith. We have to make it compelling.
Peterson answered by observing the following.
One of the things that I've been so delighted by is my observation that there's a tremendous hunger for serious conversation.
Yeah.
Public hunger for it. And when I have engaged in my lectures, I'm always extending myself to my limits of thought. Like that's what the lecture is. It's an attempt to go past what I think. And there's absolutely no doubt that everyone in the audience is on board with that.
Yes, there are a lot of us inside and outside our churches who are tired of the feelings trump facts mantra, and they are 100% ready for serious intellectual engagement with the philosophical and theological depths the Christian worldview offers. If you're watching this video, you're likely one of them. That's why it's rather ironic when Christians think that all the flashy lights and soothing atmosphere is a matter of being relevant, leaving you wondering whether the pursuit of such relevance is actually an attempt to fill the vacuum that's been created by the Church's loss of confidence in the rationality of Christianity. Now please let me clarify what I'm not saying. I am not saying that all churches are chasing emotions only and that there aren't any churches which offer solid teaching. No, there are a good amount of churches out there which take the life of the mind seriously and which habitually stretch their congregation intellectually. Neither do I want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say that feelings aren't important at all, or that the Christian life must flat out deny emotions and worship at the altar of reason instead. No, as I said, both our rational and our emotional capacities are, besides other things, part of what it means to be God's image bearers. And both of them can guide us to truth. The problem starts when either one of them is elevated at expense of the other. The thing is that many of us tend to fall into either a mind camp or a heart camp, and we're all tempted to raise our flag and elevate reason or emotions over and against the other. That's why we need each other in the body of Christ, because neither a cold, merciless and heartless bride nor one that is mindless and dumb is what John talked about when he envisioned the wedding feast of the Lamb. Now, I think that Drew slightly misses the point when he says that
if experiences of God's presence are real, they shouldn't require emotive ritual and music to occur.
Yes, I agree. To think that an experience of God requires emotive rituals and music is weird. But that doesn't mean that a real experience of God cannot affect your emotions. And so it could be that the emotional stuff happening in church is a result of God's presence rather than a requirement for it. Drew would probably respond and say that while this is possible in principle, it doesn't seem plausible given the fact that such experiences seem to primarily occur in the emotionally fluffy context of a church service. In fact, this is the key question he ultimately raises.
Of course, Christians do report spiritual experiences and conversions happening outside of church, but isn't it telling that most experiences of God's presence and most conversions seem to occur in these emotionally charged environments? It's enough to make one wonder, who is really responsible for the experiences of churchgoers? God or the church?
Now, I don't know whether Drew has any statistical data supporting his hunch that most experiences of God's presence are reported in church contexts, or whether he was content with leaving his genetically modified skepticism at the door in order to rehash his own confirmation bias here. Be that as it may, I must honestly say that his skepticism resonates with me here, because when people tell me, a Christian, about their encounter with God during last Sunday's worship session, when the sound of the keyboard was filling the room and the lights were shining perfectly, I cannot but wonder, just as Drew does, whether these are experiences of God's actual presence or just emotionally simulated versions of it. Now, you might not like me for saying this, and it might not be very spiritual of me, but I'm just being honest about my own doubts. As I said already, I'd love to hear your response in the comments if you think that I'm getting it wrong. All I'm saying is this. Drew's critique of the Sunday church service is by far not flawless. However, it challenges us to check out whether we as the church are faithfully following Christ's command to love the Lord our God with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our strength and with all our mind, or whether emotions are all we have to give. I believe we should thankfully embrace this challenge, even though or exactly because it is handed to us by a skeptic. If you enjoyed this video, move on to check out this one over here and you'll get to learn why the church should preach more suffering and less happiness, according to Jordan Peterson and Bishop Barron. Thanks for watching and see you over there.